security and access. Now that we have CRM installed and our organizational structure defined, the next step is to define the security roles and users so that way your users can access CRM and populate it with the data required for managing your company. And you will find that although this discussion of security and access will be pretty short as it's relatively easy and quick thing to do, it's nonetheless a very important step in configuring Microsoft CRM. After all, you only want to allow just the people that have the granted permissions to change things to be able to change things, and we'll see how we can assign these roles and permissions in a moment. Now, the security in Microsoft CRM is both role-based and object-based. We can secure access to CRM by assigning people roles within the organization. For example, a sales manager would most likely have a superior level of access to things inside CRM than a regular salesperson would, and this role-based security will define the things that a user can perform. Now, we can also assign permissions to objects within CRM, much like we would assign permissions to files and folders in Windows. And these objects are things like leads, contacts, opportunities, accounts, notes, queues, and so on. So before we start looking at how to create users, let's start with security roles and see how we can configure them. Through this role-based security model, CRM can quickly assign users permissions based on the roles that you assign them, much like groups in Active Directory allow or deny access to objects in your domain. So within our homepage here in Microsoft Dynamics CRM, we'll come down to the bottom left here and we'll click on the settings link. And then make sure that you have administration selected up here inside our settings menu. And on the right over here, we'll click on security roles. Okay, well here we can see a list of the roles that come inbuilt within Microsoft CRM. And a lot of these you probably won't need to change, as the roles themselves are pretty generic and should match many of the roles that you already have defined within your company. So let's take a closer look at one of these roles. Let's say the sales manager role. So if we double click on one of these roles, this will open up a new window with a whole bunch of tabs up the top here. Now, for argument's sake, if your sales managers in your company have a different title and you want to change it to something else to mimic what the job title in your own companies are, well, you can simply change the name of the role here to whatever you like. So across these tabs at the top here, we can also change the permissions that this role has to objects within CRM. So if we choose the first one here, Core Records, down the left-hand side of this first column, you can see we've got a list of all of the objects such as accounts, contacts, leads, opportunities, and so forth. And across the top, we have permissions that we can grant this role, in this case the sales manager, for each of these objects. So we can either allow or deny our sales managers the ability to create accounts, for argument's sake, or to read and write to accounts, or to delete them, append other objects to them, or even assign them to other people and share them. Now, down the bottom of this window here, we've got a legend consisting of the 5 different permissions that these objects can be assigned. Now, firstly, we have this hollowed out red circle that indicates that there are no permissions to this object, even if the record is owned by the user. We have a yellow circle with a small quarter slice that's shaded that indicates user level permissions, and this means that a user has access to only the records that they've created, records that are shared within a team, or that the user is a member of, such as the sales team, or a record that's owned by somebody else, but they've shared it directly with you. Now next we have a half shaded yellow circle which indicates that users that are assigned to a business unit are able to access this object. Now next we have the parent-child business unit access level, and this allows members of a specific business unit permissions to an object as well as any child business units beneath it, regardless of however many child business units there are. And finally over here on the right we have the full green circle, which denotes the entire organization from the root business unit down through any child business units, so you can use this to assign access to users on a global level if that's what's required. So to change any of these access levels, it's as simple as clicking on any of these icons here in the middle of the screen and just cycle through them until you find the one that you're looking for. So up the top here, currently we can see this sales manager can create accounts, but only at the business unit level. So if we wanted this sales manager to be able to create accounts in any business unit in our organization, we can click this yellow icon here, and you can see it's going to change to the next available permission. So if we click that again, it's changed here to the organizational level. So this full green circle now will indicate that our sales manager will be able to create accounts anywhere in our entire organizational structure. Now, if we just go and close this for the moment, and we won't save any changes here, we can choose to create a new security role from scratch, and it will default to having almost no permissions at all. But since there's a lot of permissions that we might need to configure, an easier method is to select one of our existing roles, and we'll choose our sales manager again. And in the More Actions menu here, we can choose to copy this security role, and let's give this one a name. We'll call it Support Manager, and then we'll click on OK. Now we have a full copy of our sales manager's role, which we can then modify, and that's certainly easier than rebuilding the entire security role from scratch. And if we click through some of these tabs here, you'll see that they're exactly the same as our sales manager's role, and we can now modify this role according to our requirements. Now, if we no longer need this support manager's role that we just created, we can simply select it from the list here and then click this black X and choose to delete it altogether. And of course, we're going to be asked to confirm our decision, so we'll say OK. And now it's gone. Now, there are a couple of roles here in this list that are worth pointing out, particularly the system administrator's role, which, as you might expect, is the all-powerful role for administering CRM. And if we double click on this role, and then we cycle through some of these tabs here, you'll notice that it pretty much has blanket control over everything, and that of course allows us to manage CRM. Now, the other one worth pointing out is the System Customizer role, which is designed for users that don't require the full administrator rights, but do need special privileges in order to customize CRM. So if we double click on this role, and then select the Customization tab, you'll note that people that have been assigned this role do have the permissions required to make customizations to CRM at the organizational level. So that means they'll be able to customize things in any business unit within the entire organization. So now that we know how permissions and roles work within CRM, let's move on and see how we can add and modify users into CRM. Now, since users need to authenticate before they can access CRM, they'll first need to have an Active Directory user account. This Active Directory user account is what's used to define whether or not users have access to CRM, but it's the permissions and roles inside CRM that can define what a user can do in CRM itself. So once a user logs on to your Active Directory domain, they won't have to log on again to use CRM. They'll only have to sign on once, which is known as a single sign-on. Now, each user in your organization will need to have a license to use CRM, and this can be one of three different types of license: either a full license, which grants the user access to any part of CRM, an administrative license, which allows for administering and customizing CRM, but this license doesn't have access to things like sales, marketing, or the service areas of CRM. And then we can have a read-only license option, which, as the name suggests, means that a user can't update CRM. They can only view things in the sales, marketing, and service areas that, of course, they've been assigned permissions to view. So let's see how we can add users to Microsoft CRM, but first we'll need to create these users in Active Directory. So I've just switched over to my domain controller here. So inside Active Directory Users and Computers, we'll go to our Users container here, and then we'll right click and we'll choose to create a new user account. And I'm going to give this guy a name of Bob. Now, something I should make clear here is that if you don't enter in both a first name and a last name for each user account, then they won't be able to be imported into CRM using the multiple users wizard, although you will be able to import each account one at a time. So let's not add in a last name for now so you can see what happens in CRM shortly. So we'll just make the user logon names the same and we'll click next. And I'm going to enter in a password for Bob and we'll type it in again just to confirm it. And for the purpose of this lab here, I'm going to uncheck user must change password at next logon and set it to never expire. And we'll click next and then finish. All right, well, let's go and create a couple more accounts. So I'm going to right click, choose a new user. We'll give this guy a name of Bill. And we'll make his user logon name and pre-Windows 2000 names the same. We'll enter in a password. We'll type it in again. Next and finish. And let's create two more accounts. So we'll right click and choose a new user. We'll give this user a name of Betty. And we'll enter in her password. And the last one, and we'll call this guy Barry. And his password, we'll type that in twice. All right, now that we've got 4 new user accounts created, let's go and switch back to our CRM server and we'll configure them to be able to use Microsoft CRM. All right, well, we're back on our CRM server, so we'll need to come down to the bottom here and click Settings. And then in the top left menu, make sure we have Administration selected. Now we'll select Users. And firstly, do take note here that we do have a default user listed here with the name of first name, last name. Now this is the administrator account that I'm logged on with right now. And at the top right of the screen here, you can see that I am logged on with this first name, last name account. So if you want to change this user to reflect that it is actually the administrator account, we'll simply double click on it. And you can see at the top here that this is the administrator account. So let's just change the first name here from first name to domain and the last name to administrator. That way it's just easier to identify this account later on. So we'll hit save and close at the top here. And if we now refresh this screen, we'll just hit F5 on the keyboard. At the top here, you can see that it's now changed and displays the correct name of Domain Administrator. All right, well, let's go back to our Users section by hitting Settings and make sure we have Administration selected and then choose Users. Now to add in a new user, we'll click on the New menu and we'll choose User. And this will open up a new window with a lot of fields that'll probably be pretty obvious as to what they're for, but the only required fields are those that you see here with the red asterisks. So for the domain logon name, we're going to enter in the details for our first account, which I think was Bob. So we're going to type in CRM lab/Bob. And we'll set Bob's first name to Bob and his last name, we'll set it to Jones. And we'll come down here to the business unit and we'll change Bob to the sales business unit. And we'll leave all of the other defaults as they are, but do take note down the bottom here that you can change Bob's client access mode to one of the 3 types that we already talked about, full, administrative, or read only, depending on what sort of license you've purchased for Bob. All right, well, we're not going to worry about the rest of these fields for now. We're just going to click Save and Close. And there's Bob's account. Now, if we double click on Bob's account, you'll notice that we have a whole bunch of other options available to us here, including Teams roles, work hours, and workflows. Now, we'll skip Teams for a moment since we'll talk about them later on, but if we click on Roles and then click Manage Roles, here we can now add Bob to a security role. So let's make Bob our sales manager and we'll click on OK. And now we'll save that change. And if I close this window, at this point here, our user Bob will now be able to log into CRM and start using the application. So let's move on and go and sort out the other users that we've just created in Active Directory. All right, well, let's click New again, and this time we'll choose to add in multiple users. And the first thing we'll need to do is to decide which business unit these users will belong to. So let's, from this drop-down box, choose our sales business unit and then click Next. Now we'll need to define what security roles we want to assign to these users. So let's all make these users salespeople. Although you can choose more than one role if that's what you require, but we'll leave it at salespeople and we'll click next. Now we can specify the type of license that these users will have, whether that be a full license, an administrative license, or a read-only one. And you might also notice that on this screen, it does actually tell you how many licenses you have and how many that you've used. And that's a nice touch. So here you can see I've used 2 licenses, but I do have unlimited in my case. So we'll leave them at a full license and we'll click next. Now, when we select our users to add, we can select users from all trusted domains and groups, or specify the domain and group to add. So let's choose the second option here, and we'll expand our domain and we'll select our users container, and then we'll click next. Now we'll click on the little lookup icon here on the right, and then the search icon. And as you can see over here on the left, it tells us that it hasn't found any records, and that's because we never filled in the last name field for our user accounts when we created them. So be aware of this gotcha. When you use the multiple users wizard, you must include both the first name and the last name in your user accounts in Active Directory, or this wizard won't be able to find the accounts. Alright, so I've just switched back to my domain controller and we'll quickly go and amend these accounts so that they do work fine. So we're going to double click on Barry and we'll give him a surname of Davidson and we'll click on OK. We'll double click on Betty and give her a last name of Smith. We'll click on OK again. Now for Bill, we'll give Bill a surname of Jackson. And then for Bob, we'll make sure his surname is Jones. Okay, so I've just switched back to my CRM server now, so let's refresh this screen by clicking our search icon again. And this time, we get our accounts returned to us. So let's select these 3 accounts here, and then we'll click these arrows, the right pointing arrows here in the middle of this window to add those records. That way they appear over here on the right in our selected records window. So we'll click on OK. Alright, now that we have the users we want to import, we'll click on the Create New Users button. And it won't take but a few moments to complete since we only have a few users. But if you're adding in a large number of users, this might take a few minutes. Alright, well we can see here that our 3 users were successfully added. And if you want to run this wizard again, you can click on the Add More Users link here, but we're done for now, so we'll click Close. Now, one thing to bear in mind though, it's quite probable that you will need to run this multiple users wizard several times, since you can only assign the whole group that you're importing to a single business unit. So if you have, say, 100 users and you want to add 25 of them to be in the sales business unit, 50 of them are going to be in the support business unit, and the remaining 25 are for marketing, then you'll need to run this wizard at least 3 times. Okay, so now we have a few users here in CRM. Let's just double click on one of them, say Barry Davison at the top here. And now we can fill in any of these other details about Barry. But I will point out that if a lot of the fields that you see here in these user accounts, such as things like the email address and the phone numbers, and on the address tab, if the address is filled in on the properties of this user account in Active Directory, then all of those details will also be brought over into CRM when you import these accounts, so you won't have to enter in all of this information twice. However, if like me, when I created these accounts a moment ago, I never filled in those fields, then you can edit them here manually if you like. So there's a good reason to ensure that you have filled in the properties of each Active Directory account, and that's going to save you some duplicate work. Now, if we click on the Actions menu at the top here, we can see that we can disable this user in CRM if we no longer need him here. But be aware that, like with our business units, we can't delete users, only disable them. Now, one nice feature of CRM is that if we do happen to disable a user, then that user's license is also put back into the pool for other users to use. So if you're running low on licenses, disabling any unused accounts, which I might add you probably should be doing anyway, is still one way of getting back some licenses to use elsewhere. Now, as a side note, if you do attempt to add new users to CRM, but you don't have any spare licenses available, then that user will still be added, but their account will be set to disabled until you have licenses available. Now, another bonus is that if you're creating accounts ahead of time, perhaps you're planning to merge with another company and you need to get CRM ready for some new people, if you create those accounts and immediately set them as disabled, you won't require a license for those users. Now, we could also reassign records that this user owns to another person, and we're going to talk about this later on in another video. We could manage this user's roles, we could join them to teams, change their business unit. For example, if this user leaves the sales team to join the marketing team, we could do that here, and we could change the manager's details. Now, assigning managers, by the way, isn't something that's required to be configured in CRM, but it's important when it comes time to things like workflow and reporting. Now, whilst we could change this user's manager from here, let's just close this screen, and instead let's configure a bunch of accounts at the same time. So I'm going to select all of our users here with the exception of Bob, who's our sales manager, and we'll click on the More Actions menu. We'll choose Change Manager, and now we'll click our little lookup icon here. We'll select Bob, and we'll click on OK, and then we'll click OK again. Now all of these users here, which of course are salespeople, they're now reporting to Bob, which you might recall is our sales manager. Now when you think about assigning managers, you must remember that managers can't be assigned to users unless they're in the same business unit, or assigned to a parent of the business unit that the user's in. Okay, so we've talked about security roles and we've seen how to create users, so let's move on and talk about teams. Teams are simply groups of users that share and collaborate on work projects, and whilst you don't have to create teams in CRM, the advantage of using teams is that information in CRM can be shared with the members of the team easily, rather than having to individually share out the work to each person that needs it. So the primary reason for setting up teams in the first place is to share work, and that's really it in a nutshell. But before we can create a team, there are a few rules that we'll need to be aware of. Firstly, a team must be assigned to a business unit, but the members of the team can include users from any business unit. Now, users can also be in more than one team, and when you choose to share records with a team, then all members of that team will have access to the record. Oh, and before I forget, like practically everything else that we've talked about, teams can't be deleted, but they can be disabled by simply removing everyone from the team, and then adding in a new team member to a disabled team is going to re-enable it automatically. So to create a team, we'll need to ensure that we've first selected in the navigation pane at the bottom of the screen, we've selected Settings, and then we'll click on Administration in the left-hand side, and then we'll choose Teams. Now by default, you can see that we don't have any teams defined, so we'll click on the New button, and then we'll need to give this team a name. So let's call this team National Sales Reps, and we'll assign this team to our sales business unit, and we'll click on OK. Now we can enter in a description if we like, and I'm not going to bother about doing that here in my lab, but of course in a production environment, I'd certainly recommend filling in each field. Now, instead of clicking Save and Close here, I'm just going to click the Save icon, since that'll allow this window to stay open. And now we can click the Members link on the left, and then we can choose to add in users that are going to become members of our team. So we'll click on Add Members, and then we'll just search for any users. And let's just add in the first 3 matches here. So we'll select those, we'll click the right arrow icon here, and then we'll click on OK. All right, well there's our 3 new members of this team, but if you do want to remove a user from the team, and let's sacrifice, say, Bill at the bottom here, we can simply highlight his account, we'll click on the More Actions menu, and then we'll choose to remove that member. And we'll say OK. All right, now let's click on Save and Close. And we'll go back to Administration, and we'll click on Users. Now let's double click on Bill again, and on the left we'll select Teams, and then we'll choose to join a team. And now we'll click on this search icon again, and here it's found our National Sales Rep team, so we'll add Bill to that team. And now we'll click on Save and Close. So as you've seen, you can either add in members to a team from the Teams menu or from the user's account. So you've got a couple of options there. Now that we have a team and we've got users assigned to our team, we can now share records with each member of the team easily, and that's something that we'll talk more about when we get into other videos on sales and marketing. So in this video, we've seen how to create and assign security roles to user accounts, as well as how to add user accounts by themselves, and how to add in a bunch of users by using the multiple users wizard. Remember that at the minimum, if you want to use that multiple users wizard, each account in Active Directory must have the first name and last name fields filled in the properties of your Active Directory user account, or the wizard simply won't be able to find the account. We then moved on and we took a look at teams, which you can use to share records with each member of the team so a group of you can collaborate on records at the same time. We hope you've enjoyed this video and would like to thank you for supporting Winstructor.